In the headlines, in a nationally televised debate, President Park Geun-hye demonstrates her commitment to sweeping deregulation reforms to bolster the economy. The U.S. Fed says it's time for another stimulus scale back. The news sent major indices into the red. Plus, a possible lead in the search for the missing Malaysian airliner. Australia says it found possible pieces of debris in the Indian Ocean. With these stories and more next on ARIRANG News at 8. Good evening to our viewers in Korea, and hello to those of you who are watching from around the world. It's Thursday, March 20th here in Seoul. I am Yoo Ji-hye. We begin this evening with President Park Geun-hye's campaign for deregulation. At a televised debate on that very topic, which is ongoing as we speak, the Korean leader stressed that cutting down on red tape is the best way to revitalize Korea's economy and create jobs. Our presidential office correspondent Choi You-sun reports.
저는 규제 개혁이야말로 경제 혁신과 대도약에 있어 돈 들이지 않고도 할 수 있는 유일한 핵심 열쇠이자 각계각층의 경제 주체들이 자유롭게 도전할 수 있는 환경을 조성하고 용기를 북돋울 수 있는 기반이라고 생각하고 있습니다.
At a special televised debate on deregulation Thursday, President Park highlighted how sweeping regulatory reforms would encourage businesses to innovate and actively invest, ultimately leading to job creation. As an example of unnecessary red tape, the president talked about how overseas fans of Korean dramas are not able to purchase the products they see on their screens. That's because they don't have the electronic identification certification required for online transactions in Korea. The president then called for government employees to be more proactive in regulatory reforms, proposing an evaluation system where they would be rewarded for their deregulation initiatives. She also asked for a balance between easing unnecessary regulations and boosting ones that are required in the areas of welfare, the environment, and personal information protection. Representatives from some 60 businesses, from conglomerates to small and mid-sized firms, also voiced their opinions. They said a regulation is often controlled by more than one ministry, which hampers new business projects that could revitalize the economy. The business leaders said there should be a system in place where ministries communicate more effectively. The corporate community also asked for a system that removes all regulation except for areas specified by the government. Also on Thursday, the government pledged to cut the volume of registered regulations to 80% of the current level by 2016. And next year, the government will adopt Britain's control system, which automatically eliminates existing regulations when new ones are introduced to ensure there's no extra cost to the public and businesses. Choi You-sun, ARIRANG News.
A growing number of Korean manufacturers believe the domestic economy is well on the road to recovery. The Korea Chamber of Commerce and Industry says the business survey index hit a 3-year high in the second quarter, jumping 19 points from the previous quarter to 111. A reading above 100 means that optimists outnumber pessimists. The survey was conducted on around 2,400 manufacturing firms. The Chamber says manufacturers expect economic conditions to improve on the back of an economic recovery in the United States and the Korean government's efforts to deregulate as part of its 3-year economic innovation plan. The U.S. Federal Reserve has slashed its stimulus package by another $10 billion and hinted at an interest rate increase to start next year. The news sent markets into the red. Hwang Ji-hye has more on the 2-day Federal Open Market Committee meeting.
U.S. Federal Reserve officials have made another $10 billion reduction in their bond-buying stimulus program as widely expected. After her first monetary policy meeting as Fed Chair Janet Yellen said Wednesday that the economy is strong enough to support continued improvement in the labor market. The program was at 85 billion a month in December, and the fresh cut will take it to 55 billion. While Yellen said that the central bank expects to keep interest rates near zero for a considerable time after the bond buying program ends this fall, she hinted that it could start raising rates next spring.
The language that we use in this statement is considerable period. So this is the kind of term it's hard to define, but probably means something on the order of around 6 months or that type of thing.
The Fed tried, however, to set the market at ease, saying it would look at a wide range of economic indicators to make a judgment on the economy's readiness for higher rates. It also said that it would no longer link its future decision to increase rates to the unemployment rate, as the jobless rate has fallen faster than expected. Despite the assurance, financial markets reacted swiftly to her comments, with U.S. stocks and government bonds falling. Market analysts say that the Fed's fresh forecasts show a shift to a more hawkish policy stance than what they had been seeing just a few months ago. Hwang Ji-hye, ARIRANG News.
And that stimulus tapering in the U.S. will have little to no effect on the Korean economy. That's the message out of Korea's finance ministry. Seoul officials said Thursday that they would continue to monitor the markets closely in the event of temporary volatility from the announcement, which coincide with sluggish growth in the Chinese economy and the crisis in Crimea. The benchmark Kospi fell nearly 1% on Thursday to close out at 1919. Now, Korea is often regarded as the world's leading IT powerhouse and wants to keep it that way. The Ministry of Trade, Industry and Energy said Thursday that it plans to invest some 200 billion won, or roughly $190 million into the semiconductor and display sectors this year. That's a 4% from last year. 30% of that total will be used to support small and mid-sized firms in the sector. The nation's 3 mobile carriers have promised they'll stop providing customers with illegal subsidies. This comes after they were hit with tens of millions of dollars in fines on top of a minimum 45-day business suspension. Na Young-kyung reports.
The first thing the nation's 3 mobile carriers promised was to root out the practice of offering subsidies to lure customers once and for all. At a joint press conference Thursday, SK Telecom, KT, and LG U+ vowed to shift their sales paradigm from one oriented around illegal subsidies to one that's service-oriented. To do that, they will work with the country's handset makers, including Samsung and LG Electronics, to lower the factory price of cell phones so that retailers will not feel the need to give subsidies to their customers, thereby igniting an unfair competition in the market. The 3 carriers also plan to launch a market monitoring team run by the 3 firms, and they will temporarily sever the network of retailers that violate regulations. Thursday's announcement comes after the 3 were put under a minimum 45-day business suspension by the ICT Ministry and the Korea Communications Commission earlier this month. The penalty was their punishment for attempting to entice customers with subsidies. This is a customary tactic in Korea's mobile telecommunications market, where mobile carriers pay a huge chunk of what a customer is supposed to pay for a mobile device. Despite the telecom companies' will to offer better services and stabilize the market, skeptics say their plan as of now is too vague and that the 3 are shifting responsibility to the retailers rather than fixing the problem at the source. Na Hyun-kyung, ARIRANG News.
A nationwide doctor strike initially planned for next week won't take place after all. The Korean Medical Association said Thursday it was calling off the plan and accepting a tentative agreement reached with the government on contentious medical policies. The announcement followed a poll of 41,000 KMA doctors, and with 62% voted to accept the deal. It includes a plan to carry out a trial run on the controversial telemedicine system and allow hospitals to build for-profit subsidiaries. The planned 6-day strike was to start next Monday and followed a 1-day doctor strike earlier this month.
For the latest in news that impacts Korea and the world, join Yoo Ji-hye for a lively half-hour that covers politics, business, international news, and much more. Live at 8. every weeknight on ARIRANG TV.
Move aimed at fostering startups is part of the government's 3-year economic innovation. The presidents of South Korea and China will hold bilateral talks on the sidelines of the Nuclear Security Summit at The Hague next week. Beijing's Foreign Ministry spokesperson said Thursday that Chinese President Xi Jinping will sit down with his Korean counterpart Park Geun-hye. Will also hold other one-on-ones with the leaders of the U.S., Kazakhstan, Finland, and the UK. It'll be the third bilateral summit between President Park and Xi since last June. Well, it's been confirmed that President Park will be sitting down with President Xi in The Hague next week. We're still waiting to find out whether she'll finally hold summit talks with Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. It's looking more and more likely by the day. Our Hwang Sung-hee reports.
It's looking increasingly likely that President Park Geun-hye will meet with their Japanese counterpart in what will be the first official meeting between the two since she took office last year. The meeting would take place as part of a trilateral summit with the United States on the sidelines of next week's Nuclear Security Summit in The Hague. President Park has thus far refused to sit down with Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, criticizing him for his distorted perception of history. But Abe's recent stream of conciliatory gestures has put the ball in President Park's court. Last week, the Japanese leader stated his administration will uphold a landmark apology issued to the victims of Japan's wartime sexual enslavement. Just days later, Abe called South Korea Japan's most important neighboring country and expressed his hope that the two could build a future-oriented relationship at the upcoming meeting in the Netherlands. The Japanese government has also reportedly postponed announcing the results of its annual textbook screening to early April from March 26th. The event usually angers South Korea, which argues Japan is trying to cover up its wartime crimes and making unjustified territorial claims over the Korea-controlled Dokdo Island. Sources in Seoul say that Tokyo's actions may not be enough for a bilateral summit, but that the two could meet in the presence of the U.S. The presidential office of Cheongwade is reportedly reviewing whether to say yes to the trilateral summit next week. If the talks do take place, the three leaders will likely discuss North Korea's nuclear program and regional issues of mutual interest. As willing as the two neighbors may be to patch up their differences, they're also under pressure from Washington, who wants its two main allies in Northeast Asia to mend ties before President Barack Obama visits the region next month. Hwang Sung-hee, ARIRANG News.
And speaking of resuming stalled dialogue, North Korea and Japan have agreed to restart their government talks. Speaking at a press conference, an official from Japan's foreign ministry said the two governments had come to an agreement on holding formal bilateral meetings, but not much else. The decision came Thursday after a 2-day informal meeting between Red Cross and government officials from both countries. Pundits say the talks will likely center on repatriating the remains of Japanese nationals who died in North Korea during World War II. They'll be the first government-level discussions between North Korea and Japan since 2012, when talks were scrapped after Pyongyang launched a long-range rocket. Up in the north, the communist state will hold the first session of its new legislature next month, the first since North Korean leader Kim Jong-un assumed power in 2011. The North State-run Korean Central News Agency reported Thursday that the inaugural session of the 13th Supreme People's Assembly is slated for April 9th in Pyongyang. They're expected to discuss matters related to helping Kim consolidate his power base after recent purge of close aides. Earlier this month, 687 new deputies were elected to the North's rubber stamp legislature, including Kim Jong-un, who was elected unanimously. The popularity of the Korean language is spreading around the globe. In fact, tens of thousands of students overseas are now selecting Korean as their second language. Our Kim Hyun-bin delves into what's behind the Korean language boom.
The Ministry of Education has been taking the initiative to spread the Korean language around the globe, and it launched a 5-year plan to promote it in 2011. The goal was to enhance Korea's global status. For the Korean government, it was also a chance to find overseas talent. As a result, tens of thousands of elementary to middle school students in 24 countries are choosing Korean as their second language. What triggered the boom?
The Korean wave played a big part in the fact Korea became well off. Students watch Korean dramas and listen to K-pop, and they want to speak Korean. The point is, Korea's dynamic culture has influenced young people abroad.
By the end of 2011, there were a total of 695 Korean language classes in elementary and middle schools in 22 countries. By the end of 2013, that number jumped to 882 classes in 24 countries. In Asia alone, over 41,000 students and 476 schools were offering Korean in their curriculum. Classes were open in England, Bulgaria, and other countries for the first time in late 2013. So is the booming interest in the Korean language here to stay?
As we provide the Korean language, we need to make an effort to learn their culture, and the Korean wave will continue to be successful, and more foreigners will show their love and appreciation for it.
The Ministry of Education says it is working to expand the Korean language program to 1,000 classes in 28 countries by the end of this year. Kim Hyun-bin, ARIRANG News.
Let's get the latest on the top stories on the global front, from the latest clues leading to the missing Malaysia airliner to $1 billion fine against Toyota in the U.S. We go live to our Paul Lee at the News Center in Nepal. It's been nearly 2 weeks now since the Malaysian jetliner went missing, but it looks like there could be a possible breakthrough in the case.
That's right, Jay. Australia's Prime Minister Tony Abbott announced earlier Thursday that 2 objects spotted in the South Indian Ocean may be related to the Malaysian airliner that vanished without a trace on March 8th. If confirmed, it would represent the first major lead in the investigation over what happened to the plane and the 239 people on board. According to satellite images, the objects were found about 2,300 kilometers away from the Australian city of Perth. The objects were also reportedly large in size, up to 24 meters long. 4 military planes, 6 Malaysian Navy ships have been dispatched to the area, with helicopters already scanning the waters in question. But experts say high waves and deep marine trenches are hampering search efforts.
That certainly sounds promising, but what has the Malaysian government had to say about this newest development?
Well, Malaysia's acting transport minister, His Hamuddin Hussein, described the new images as a credible lead, but added they were in process of verifying the information. Australian Prime Minister Abbott has also been cautious, saying that the task of locating these objects would be extremely difficult and that they may not be related to the missing Boeing 777. In the U.S., President Barack Obama said that the search for the Malaysian airliner was a top priority and that every possible resource is being offered to the Malaysian government.
Right, Paul, let's move over to Ukraine now, where the government says it's planning a withdrawal from the Crimea Peninsula. What steps is the Ukrainian government taking right now?
Well, the Ukrainian government is making preparations to evacuate troops and their families from Crimea after more Ukrainian bases were taken over by Russian forces on Wednesday. Western leaders, meanwhile, say they will slap even more sanctions on Russia if Moscow doesn't back down. Our Shin Se-min has the details.
It does not appear that the Ukrainian military will be taking a stand in Crimea. The head of Ukraine's National Security and Defense Council said Wednesday that plans were in motion to relocate 25,000 service personnel and families from the Crimean Peninsula. The announcement came after pro-Russian forces stormed 2 naval bases in Crimea on Wednesday night and raised the Russian flag. They're the latest in a series of takeovers by Russian troops and local self-defense forces. The attacks on the bases in Crimea come as the United States and Europe seek ways to increase pressure on Russia. Speaking from the former Soviet Republic of Lithuania Wednesday, U.S. Vice President Joe Biden declared that the U.S. was absolutely committed to defending its allies.
I want to make it clear. We stand resolutely with our Baltic allies in support of the Ukrainian people and against Russian aggression. As long as Russia continues on this dark path, they will face increasing political and economic isolation.
The Obama administration and its allies says they're working to devise new and tougher economic penalties to stop Russian President Vladimir Putin from moving forces further into Ukraine's eastern territory. UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon is scheduled to meet with Putin in Moscow on Thursday to talk about the unfolding diplomatic crisis. Shin Se-min, ARIRANG News.
And to the unrest in Taiwan, where hundreds of demonstrators stormed Parliament on Tuesday night in protest of trade deal with China. Paul, what's the latest?
Well, 3 days in, the large group of mainly university students and activists is still occupying the main parliamentary chamber after barricading themselves inside. Taipei's police tried to take back the building Wednesday, but were unsuccessful, leaving 38 officers injured. At the center of the conflict is a trade agreement that what protesters say would hurt Taiwan's economy and leave the country vulnerable to pressure from Beijing. China is Taiwan's biggest trading partner, and the trade pact is meant to open up each other's services market in up to 80 industries. The protesters say they will take further action unless President Ma Ying-jeou responds to their demands by Friday.
Right, Paul. Shifting gears now, let's talk about this billion-dollar settlement between the U.S. Justice Department and Japanese automaker Toyota.
Well, the agreement comes after a 4-year investigation by U.S. regulators. Toyota had recalled more than 10 million cars from 2009 due to problems with their brakes, accelerator pedals, and floor mats. U.S. Attorney General Eric Holder said that Toyota has misled the public, federal regulators, and Congress to conceal known safety issues.
As part of the resolution of this case, Toyota will fully admit wrongdoing. It will pay a financial penalty of $1.2 billion. And going forward, the company will submit to rigorous review by an independent monitor that will examine and assess the manner in which Toyota regularly reports safety issues to the public and its regulator.
The fine is the largest criminal penalty imposed on a car company in U.S. history. Jie?
All right, Paul, thank you very much for that update. We'll see you back in about 2 hours' time. Let's get a check on the weather with our Kim Bo-kyung at the Weather Center. Now, Bo-kyung, it's raining here in the capital. How are other regions looking?
Well, Gia, just about the same, so make sure to grab an umbrella on your way home. Taking a closer look at the current conditions, the nation is under the influence of a low-pressure trough, which is why we're seeing cloudy skies and drizzles nationwide. The central regions and both Gyeongsang-do provinces will get another 5 millimeters of precipitation through later tonight. Keep in mind that the showers may be accompanied with strong winds and thunder. Also, a heavy snowfall watch has been issued on the mountains of Gangwon-do province, where up to 7 centimeters are forecast. Other than that, after this round of snow and showers, Friday looks to be a clear day. However, temperatures will drop overnight. Seoul's morning low dips to 1 degree with a high of 12, while Daegu and Busan reach the mid-teens. Moving on to other regions, Daejeon and Jeju make it to the low teens, while Dokdo tops out at 6. Well, that's all the updates for Korea, and here's a look at the international weather.
And that brings us to the end of our newscast. I'm Yoo Ji-hye in Seoul. I'll be back with more news updates on our primetime news at 10 p.m. Korea time. See you then.